Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
And we're here for another week. Another week.
Another Nutter Butter week. The show brought to you by Nutter Butters. Don't eat 'em.
Episode 41. It's starting to get impressive.
You know, I was thinking about it just yesterday, like how we hit a stretch. It felt like from like 20 to 35, the shows were just blowing by. Like it was rapid fire. And the last 5 have been exhausting, you know. But no, it's definitely been like, it's just been the topics have been a little bit tougher.
Who would have thought, like, as the year would go on, it's harder and harder to find stuff.
Who would have thought that, like, the barest amount of responsibility would wither me down into a shell of a man? Like, I have to get 2 to 3 pages of notes ready every week, and I'm like, fuck, I'm exhausted. It's like, and then I think, like, how the fuck did I end up, like, even getting an associate's degree? Because it's like, this is the least amount of work I've ever had to do for anything.
Yeah, but when you're in school, I don't remember if you worked while you were going to college, but
no, I didn't.
You're pretty well focused on college, and to do this, it's like you've got all your other life stuff, and then you're like, on top of it, I have to try to find something that's interesting that we haven't talked about already, and then make notes. Like,
right, but like we literally started this show like with like one Twitter conversation of like, hey, we're both bored. You know, so the alternative was I was staring at the wall wanting something to do. And
that's true.
And now I got something to do every week, and I'm like, fuck.
Yeah. Careful what you wish for.
But that's just because it's probably just because there's a lot of video games I want to play right now. Yeah. But once that slows down, it'll be like, man, thank God for this show.
So if you're not familiar with this show, what we do each week is, Ben and I both bring like a different. Sometimes it's a real life like story or biography or I don't know topic. Sometimes it's like paranormal stuff, and sometimes it's just flat out like we'll read fiction, creepypastas. Yeah. But the key is that neither of us knows what the other person's going to bring, and the only rule is that it needs to be interesting, at least to us.
Yeah.
I hope it's interesting to other people too, but
yeah, that's been our rule of thumb: is if we find this fascinating, chances are it will make for a decent show. And so far, I think we've done our part. But you know, we'll let the audience.
I'll admit there's been weeks where I'll have a topic where I'm not that excited about, but I won't tell you guys which ones those were.
Right.
I'm going to pretend like I loved every single topic. I do like mine for this week, though.
Yeah, every episode has been our best episode. But no, this week my topic, I always tweet little hints while I'm getting my notes together, and it's mostly to keep myself sane. But this week I hit a topic that was right in our alley, especially considering last week we talked about your topic concerned life insurance fraud and murder, and which we've
12 idiots that couldn't pull off what should be like the easiest murder plan in the world,
right? And that's kind of a theme we've touched on before, like the bumbling idiots who are trying to murder for profit but can't seem to do it. And I found a story that initially seemed right down that alley for us, and I jumped in right away. I was like, oh, this will be great. This is, I mean, maybe it's not as creative, but it should be an entertaining version of that. And then by the end, I was just pissed.
Yeah, that's what your little like teaser was, is the head, and so I'm curious,
right? Because like you're expecting like, oh, this will be lighthearted as much as murder can be. Yeah, this will be a lighthearted,
it's one of those jolly murders.
Yeah, look at these dipshits. But then by the end of it, it's like everyone involved in this was a fucking asshole. So let's get to it. Ruth Brown was born in Manhattan in 1895. She was from a working-class Scandinavian family, and in the 8th grade, she left school and got a job with the telephone company, and at night took business classes in shorthand and typing.
It seems weird to leave school to join night school, but I get it. You got to work.
Yeah, you got to make money and stuff, especially early 1900s. She had this, people said she had this real drive to get ahead and work hard. But like most women of that time, there was this cultural fixation on marriage and family being more important than independent success or career. And most women, whether they wanted to or not, kind of you fell into that thinking. Like that ended up being your kind of goal in life, wasn't your career or your own personal life, but starting a family. And Ruth was no different. And when she took a job as a secretary at Motorboating magazine, at the age of 19.
I thought you said murder boating. I was like, what's murder boating? I'm intrigued.
Yeah, that's what got me hooked. And then I was just pissed off. Wait, motorboating? This is bullshit. So she took that job at the age of 19, and at that magazine there was a 32-year-old art director named Ruth Snyder who took an interest in her. The two dated for a few months and ultimately would get married in 1915. They lived in Brooklyn and had a daughter named Lorraine in 1918. As Albert got more successful with the magazine, he would move the family to a bigger apartment in the Bronx, and then eventually an 8-room house in Queens. Albert saw this as a mark of success, but Ruth felt isolated by her suddenly typical suburban life as a mom and a housekeeper.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't think about that, but when you're in the city, you're at least around a bunch of other people, and then, like you said, the whole, like, idyllic, this is what we're supposed to strive for thing was to completely isolate, like...
Right.
I imagine she was a stay-at-home mom by that point.
Yeah,
and,
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So it's like she had all the luxuries that an early 1900s girl was supposed to strive for, but I'm sure it's shocking to all of us that marriage and luxury are not how you achieve a balanced, fulfilling life. She wasn't happy, and Albert was while he was described as a good, faithful husband and proud of the family he had and the life he had worked for, he was also a moody bastard and a bit of a shut-in. He was just this terrible contrast for the still, young Ruth, who wanted to be around people and socialize. She was still in her early 20s, and she wanted to go out to restaurants and go to the theater and all that stuff that girls did. And Albert wanted to just kind of stay home and keep to his hobbies. He liked
smoke a cigar with his sweater and read the newspaper. And,
he liked to work on cars and work on his garden and stuff, and just kind of be a homebody when he wasn't at work. Ruth she loved animals and pets and would have, if she had her way, she would fill the house with pets. And Albert could only tolerate one pet bird. While Ruth loved children, Albert wasn't so big on the idea in the first place and was supposedly, quote, doubly disappointed that his one child was a girl. So he was an asshole, at the core of it. So I personally, I firmly believe that couples don't have to actually have that much in common in order to have a strong relationship as far as like interests, I think ideas of like mentality, respect, core values, and all that other Dr. Phil shit are more important than do we like to do the same things all the time?
Right, right. As long as you can mesh with that,
Right. But as you can guess, Ruth and Albert were a terrible match. Albert knew Ruth was too young and outgoing for him by this point. And again, he's an asshole, so he would frequently compare Ruth to his previous serious fiancée, who had died just before their wedding, which is like the moment you start like openly comparing your current significant other with the one before, and you're
and
just
kind of pointing out. It sounds like too that if I could have stayed with her, but
right, because his big thing was like, you should be more serious. We should be serious, and you seriously make dinner while I seriously work on my car. He seems like a piece of shit, in all honesty. But again, it's probably a big case of like these two just weren't right for each other.
Yeah. It sounds more like they rushed into, and that happens. The initial phases, you're focused on other things. You love being around each other, and you like, and then that's way different than living a life with somebody.
Right. And that it was definitely a societal thing then, but you can argue that people get together and stay together, even though it's wrong all the time now. It's just something about human relationships. In 1925, the unhappy married Ruth would meet a corset salesman named Henry Judd Gray while having lunch in New York. Now 32, Ruth was still considered attractive by all accounts, and her poor marriage didn't wither down her confident, commanding personality. Judd, age 34, was short and said to be pretty forgettable as a person. He had, the only thing kind of noteworthy about him was he wore like thick glasses that made him always seem to look pretty surprised by everything. There are photos of him, and he is very, very like nerdy.
That's my kind of dude. Maybe, I don't know. Let's see where this goes. But
spoiler, I fucking hate him by the end of this. Again, opposites kind of attracted, and they began a torrid affair where they would meet at Ruth's home while her daughter was at school. Or Ruth would leave their daughter Lorraine in a hotel lobby while she met Gray upstairs. So like, Ruth is in some ways a societal victim in the story, but there comes a point in this where, she crosses that line and she's a piece of shit too. And I think it starts here when you start anytime, and when it happens now and you hear about it in stories now, when a child has to be involved in this kind of sleazy, fucked up shit, like that's always where I'm like, all right, fuck you guys. Fuck all of you. But something changed in Ruth beyond just lust over this 2 year affair. And she supposedly began to try to convince Judd that her husband was abusive and needed to be killed. Gray objected, but after persistent suggestions that led to outright commands, he ultimately gave into her plan on March 19th, 1927.
I always like those stories, too, because murder is such like a moral thing. I like the idea of being like, no, I'm not going to do it. Okay.
Yeah. I just want to state here that Gray, through all these stories, gets kind of glanced over and put in this sidekick role by papers from back then, which is unfortunately what we use for a lot of the information on these articles now. Like, I'm sure Ruth had a strong personality that carried a lot of momentum of the following crime. And Gray does definitely seem like something of a bit of a submissive bastard. But they're both pieces of shit, and they were both in on it. Society just fixated on Ruth's role more because, of course, society.
Right.
So after a recent $48,000 life insurance policy had been purchased on Albert, the two devised a plan to have Judd sneak into the house through the back door and hide in a spare room where Ruth had left a window weight, rubber gloves, and chloroform. When the family got home at 2 a.m. from a party, Ruth supposedly snuck into that spare room, slept with Gray one more time while her husband slept just down the hallway, and then after an hour, Gray grabbed the weight and was led to the bedroom by Ruth. Albert was asleep with blankets over his head, and then Gray attempted to strike him with the weight, but since he was a little bitch, the blow just glanced off Albert's head. Albert let out a roar of pain and lunged out after Gray, and the terrified Gray screamed for Ruth to help. Supposedly, Ruth was more enraged than panicked, and in the scuffle where they tried to chloroform Albert and strangle him with a wire, she ultimately just grabbed the weight for herself and crashed it down on Albert's skull, killing him.
What?
So it was a terrible, just a botch. Like, there's nothing.
Yeah.
It was a bad idea, and it somehow went worse. So after that, they went downstairs and drank while they worked out the rest of their plan. You'd think they would have had it all set to go since they were planning it. But I guess they needed to figure out what to do. They were going to knock over chairs, and Gray loosely tied Ruth's hands and feet to make it look like a break-in had occurred of some sort. After Gray left, Ruth began banging on her daughter's door, which, again, bringing your daughter into this shit is really where
it's just the slaughter of her father.
Which is terrible, but you're also, going to, make it, you're going to put her into the lie, and sell that even though you murdered her father. So that's where, my anger at Ruth really, besides being a murderer, obviously, like that's where it's like, you're also just a piece of shit mom, if this is true. So she was trying to fool Lorraine, and the startled Lorraine went to go get help from next door, and the police were called. This began a trial for what the famed newsman of the time, Damon Runyon, would call the dumbbell murder, because it was, quote, so dumb and perpetrated by, quote, inept idiots. So as the investigation got started, a detective began to check out the scene, quickly finding Henry Judd Gray's name in Ruth's checkbook and address book. Ruth was trying to sell some flimsy break-in story about 2 Italian intruders, but none of the items she said were gone were actually missing from the house. They were just hidden in various spots.
So he couldn't just take them with him when he left them, like dump them in a river or something. They're just, yeah.
After just a couple hours, one detective calmly asked, "What about Judd Gray?" Ruth gasped. "Has he confessed?" Nope, but she basically did. Gray and Ruth basically turned on each other immediately, trying to sell the other person as the mastermind. This was just a couple hours, just an immediate, all right, case closed, good job, detective. Let's go to the bar and get a taste on me. Like they were...
Yeah, I imagine they show up like, God, this is going to be a long night. Nope.
Yeah, like a breaking and entering. Fuck, two Italians? How are we going to track these guys down? And then just being like, wait, they're so full of shit. So it's a very open and shut case, but because it was based around an affair and a woman with such a forceful personality, the media was all over it, sucking down every detail they could find about Gray and Ruth's relationship, interviewing everyone who had ever known them, and really painting this picture that Henry Judd Gray was this likable family man who, it's worth noting, had a wife and child of his own during this affair, and had been pulled in by the bad woman who should have known better than to sleep with such a good gentleman like Gray.
Well, of course.
It's like, I love that. Like, it's still true now, but just like, I love the defense of like, I tripped and my dick fell in. You're like, just,
Well, it hinges on that, like, well, as a guy, if she offered, I can't possibly say no.
You should have known better than like to offer me something I would never refuse. So they made this big drama out of it, and it really was just complete bullshit, trying all these mental gymnastics possible to make Gray seem like a victim of Ruth's manipulation and not just the little weaselly murderer that he was. This was solely because society saw a woman committing adultery as something heinous, while if a man did it, it was more of a, now, you should have known better.
Right.
It was really a double standard. Even the arresting detective said Gray seemed like a really nice guy. Like, they were trying to prove he was, not the detectives, but his defense were trying to prove that he was legally insane because of his relationship with Ruth. Despite having the knowledge before the murder to have a friend from work lie for him and try to create a very weak-ass alibi.
You always wonder how they expect that to work, too, because if you're... And I assume the friend from work probably knew he was...
Yeah, he knew he was lying. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but he probably didn't know he was going to murder somebody. But that's what I mean. If you're like coworker... Shit, I think most of us wouldn't lie to cover up their affair. But say they're like, oh man, I'm going to go out drinking tonight, but my wife will be pissed. So if she asks, tell her how's that work. You're like, fine. Yeah. And then the police come. They're like, we think he murdered somebody. I'd be like, yeah, I'm not lying to cover that up. Like,
right. And like the alibi was a really flimsy one where like he just like his friend said like, nah, he was in a hotel room. I know because there was a do not disturb sign on the door. Like, it's like, that doesn't prove anything, you dipshits. Eventually, despite getting preferential treatment compared to Ruth, Gray, the evidence was against Gray too, and he was so backed into a corner that he did eventually have to cop to some part in the actual murder in hopes that maybe he would get like a lighter sentencing. And his version of events is the story I just read to you. And that's where I got really fucking mad, because nobody wanted to hear what Ruth had to say or her side of the story. They already made up their mind that she was this mastermind and Gray would tell the truth.
See, I was curious because I could tell you were getting that you don't like this guy, but from the story you told, there's no like excuse. There's not like it's better to like not want to murder somebody, but you do it anyway. You know, that's still the same thing. But you know, I could see it was very much painting that
painting
picture.
That like he was the, you know, gee shucks, I don't know, Miss Ruth. Like, but it's like, no, you were definitely in on it. So like nobody wanted to hear what Ruth had to say or her side of the story. Anytime she tried to elaborate during her trial beyond a yes or no answer, she was basically told to shut up. Despite the fact that her version was just as plausible as Gray's, she maintained that over the course of her affair, Gray began to start going beyond sex and romance and started asking for money here and there. And he would threaten to expose the truth to Albert if Ruth didn't continue to pay him, which was only really a threat for Ruth because she didn't want to lose her daughter in a legal battle.
Right.
So she
would kind of explain his name showing up in her checkbook.
Sure, yeah. She said that Gray saw a financial opportunity with the life insurance thing and that the murder was his idea. She had supposedly talked him out of this before, but on the night of the murder, nothing she did or said worked. She called Gray a lying, cringing jackal hiding behind her skirts. Now, I don't totally believe her version either. Like, she's still a fucking murderer.
Yeah, I mean, because if you really didn't want to... I get the, like, being afraid of exposing the affair, but when he shows up at your house to kill your husband, you'd probably call the cops.
Right, like, you know. And she said, like, oh, I was going to try to just sort of, like, liquor him up and, you know, he would pass out and, you know, talk him out of it or some shit. You know, so it's still not a strong story, but it is worth noting that all the actual physical evidence points to Gray on this case as more of the mastermind than her. Witnesses saw him buy the murder weapons, and he was the one trying to prepare an alibi before, albeit that flimsy one with the hotel room. And you have to remember, Ruth didn't even have time to make this shit look like an actual break-in. So
right.
How, well, you know, maybe they're dumb as a stump, but it also lends credence to the idea that, you know, she wasn't, you know, planning on her husband actually dying that night. Not saying that's not the case, or that is the case, but it's definitely more plausible than his version. So while both Gray and Ruth were sentenced to death, even Gray's, you know, favorable testimony still worked against him. He was still a murderer. But there was certainly a vindictiveness towards Ruth's sentencing that wasn't there for Gray. Press tried to paint Gray as calm and repentant, and that he approached the electric chair like a man, noble in his urging to young men to stay away from liquor and bad women, while Ruth was a disheveled wreck as her hour of atonement neared, pleading for mercy. On a very fucked up note, a man snuck a camera into Ruth's execution and took the first picture of one ever recorded.
Cool.
And front page.
How do you... This would have had to be in like late
1920s, maybe 1930.
So how do you sneak a camera in?
He taped it to his leg. Nobody...
I thought they were still pretty fucking big and like took
some... They probably were. He probably wore pretty big pants to make it work, but
and thus bell bottoms were invented.
And the disco era was born. So yeah, again, they're both murderers, but reading Gray getting talked up as anything more than that in this story was really what pissed me off. It's such bullshit.
Yeah.
Ruth did give a last interview while in prison stating, "I said before, go straight, and I mean it more than ever. And I wish a lot of women who may be sinning could come here and see what I have done for myself through sinning, and maybe they would do some of the thinking I have done for months, and they would be satisfied with their homes and would stop wishing for things they should try to get along without when they can't have them."
That's a pretty fucked up lesson to get.
Yeah, well, it goes on. Maybe there are women who have nice homes and husbands who do the best they can for them, even if they don't like their husbands, and they could bear it if they could only make up their minds that everything can't be just perfect. Which is a real bummer of a lesson to take from all this, when the real lesson should have been, don't let society tell you how to be happy. Because This whole tragedy was put in motion the moment Albert and Ruth decided their marriage was mandatory.
See, we hear a lot about how a lot of people, especially old people, will be more, people get too many divorces nowadays, and it's too easy, and this and that, and you know, you can have beliefs on that. You know, I think the problem is too many people rush into marriage, and there's a lot of reasons for that.
Right.
But they're like, back in the day, you know, you got married, you stayed married. It's like, yeah, and then you had an affair and then murdered your husband and got electrocuted. Like, it's such a better time.
Right. Yeah.
And especially when you're like, yeah, your last like interview is, well, maybe I should have I hope more women just put up with the shitty lifestyle. It's better than.
Right. You know, like, I think there is some truth to the idea of like a relationship is work. You have to work on it, and like things won't be perfect all the time. But a lot of people end up in these situations, obviously not murder, but they end up in these situations where they're not happy, and they just keep throwing themselves into that wall instead of saying like, wait, I don't need to do this. Like,
right.
And so people just sort of commit themselves to a miserable life and a miserable relationship when it's really self-inflicted at the end of the day, because you just listen to like what people said you're supposed to do. And that's the real, you know, like bummer of this story. It was like, you know, Ruth is a murderer, but she's also in a lot of ways kind of a victim of the time she was in. You know, and Gray, and it's really just the thing that just pissed me off a lot was like Gray getting like this social free pass, as much as you can for going to the fucking electric chair, I guess. But still just like being painted as like, this poor man, he bravely walked in.
Right. We're going to execute him, but then we'll build a monument to him.
Right. As a model for young men to look up and say, boy, I sure hope I don't have sex. Like, it's so fucking dumb, but what can you do? You know, that's me. That's all I got this week.
It's a wonderfully depressing story.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm a wonderfully depressing person. That's what I put on all my dating app bios. I will bum you out like no other.
My story will change the tone a little bit. It's more of a cool, like, every now and then it's fun to just kind of profile a badass, and that's what this week is.
I did that last week. I mean, he was a bad guy, but he was also nicknamed Super Killer.
So, Leo Major was born to French-Canadian parents in Massachusetts on January 23rd, 1921. They moved to Montreal when Leo was 1, but due to a poor relationship with his father, at the age of 14, Leo moved in with his aunt. At the age 19, Leo joined the Canadian military in an attempt to prove to his father that he was, quote, someone to be proud of. He must have been really damn determined to prove that, because the story that follows is pretty freaking nuts. So if you do the math, Leo joined the military in 1940, and as we all know, the 1940s were a rockin' good time to be a member of the military. Yeah,
to suit up.
Thanks to World War II, which was kind of going on and involved just about everybody in the world, hence the name. Leo was still a member of the Canadian military on June 6, 1944, which is D-Day, where he'd be part of Canada's invasion at the beaches of Normandy. He would act as his job, he was a scout and a sniper. At least that's what they call him in the articles now. I used to read a lot about this kind of stuff, World War II, and Vietnam, and snipers were always really cool. And sniping really didn't become an official, like, thing for most armies until later. But, like, they did it in World War II, but it wasn't, like, an organized, sniper school type deal. But
they weren't doing trick shots yet, where it's like, hey, I'm going to hit it right off of a pan, and then it'll go into this dude's nuts.
You were just a private that was really fucking good with a gun. So everybody was like, hey, you shoot this person from long range. But anyway, that's what he did. Reconnaissance, they're the kind of guys that sneak behind enemy lines and shoot shit. D-Day was, of course, a horrific thing to be a part of, but it makes for a pretty epic day to kick off your career as Canadian Rambo. So on the day of the invasion, during a recon mission, Leo managed to capture a German half-track, which is an armored transport vehicle, single-handedly. Inside said half-track was a cache of German radio equipment and communications codes. So, fucking jackpot.
Yeah, dude. It's like, man, I just won the war.
You sure earn a free drink when you get back to camp that night.
He stole a German vehicle and then ran over Hitler.
Had Hitler's last known address in it. Sweet. The following day, Leo came across a group of 4 SS soldiers and single-handedly took them all out. Unfortunately, one of the soldiers had managed to prime and release a phosphorus grenade, which exploded and destroyed Leo's left eye.
So, yeah, we'll replace it with a cyborg eye, make him cooler.
Well, that's what Leo's commanders thanked him for his service and told him that he could head on home under the, disability discharge. And Leo said, "Fuck you, eh?"
Don't be a
Remember,
bitch.
he's Canadian. Yeah. He literally is quoted as saying,
"I still got my right and take his eye."
His eye. He said, "I still got my right eye, and that's the only one I need to shoot my rifle. I'm going back in."
I love it, man.
Yeah. And you'll also like this. He was quoted, various points as saying how cool it was, kind of that he was happy because with his missing eye, it sort of made him look like a pirate.
This guy is a fucking anime, dude. Like, he is a Metal Gear Solid character for sure.
Yeah. So later that year, during the Battle of Scheldt, the Canadian pirate sniper was sent to retrieve a group of new recruits who had failed to return to base. While he was out, just for the hell of it, Leo single-handedly captured some German soldiers, 93 of them to be exact.
I love it. Like, I love that. Hang on, I'm going to go out and get some soldiers.
Yeah, so like, I read that and I'm like, that can't fucking possibly be true. But it's like, I have multiple sources, and you'll see them if you go to our website, and they're all like listing the same story. And there's, at the end, you'll see, I mean, a lot of war stories get exaggerated, and I'm sure some of that'll go on here, but not like these numbers and stuff, like the actual events. But anyway, so it's like, well, how does one man capture 93 enemy soldiers? So according to Wikipedia, it went something like this. Leo was out on his mission when he spotted 2 German soldiers on patrol. Leo was wet and cold, and he was pretty pissed that he had to be out there when it was wet and cold. And he decided that it was their fault that he was, again, wet and cold. So he decided he was going to make them pay for it.
That's a little disturbing. Getting a little less from anime badass and more into Quentin Tarantino's Psychopath.
Like, you fuckers, I wouldn't be out here if it wasn't for you.
I hate being cold.
So he captured the first soldier and then used him as bait to attract the second soldier. However, the second soldier went for his weapon, so Leo shot and killed him.
That was a good idea.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Leo then captured the garrison commander, although they leave the specifics of that out. I imagine he again used his prisoner as bait. Then after shooting and killing 3 more troops, the entire garrison was convinced to surrender entirely because he had his commander.
This is like the equivalent of like martial arts movies where they attack the hero one at a time, but then at the end they would all give up.
Yeah, they're like, oh fuck, he's got the sensei. You're our new master now.
You beat the last 4 guys one-on-one. We have no chance.
So during their march back to base, SS soldiers spotted the parade, I guess, and opened fire, killing 7 of their own men, but failing to stop Leo from escorting the rest back to Canadian lines. So, as you can imagine, single-handedly capturing a garrison of enemy soldiers is a deed worthy of a medal. And so for his actions, Leo Major was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, which was one of the highest...
Which unfortunately looks like an eye.
Yeah.
It was very...
Well, I mean, that would be convenient. You could pop it on in and be like, here you go.
I mean, it was convenient, but like, it maybe a little insensitive.
It's insulting. Well, just wait. But anyway, it's basically the second highest honor a Canadian soldier could receive at the time. Probably, I think still today, but I don't know. I'm not a military historian. However, he was set to be awarded this medal by a general by the name of Montgomery. Leo flatly refused the award, saying that Montgomery was an incompetent, and as such, any medal awarded by him was worthless anyway.
Awesome. Oh, man, that's awesome. Look.
And he's a private, so that's like lowest ranked guy and the highest ranked guy, and I'm saying, fuck this guy, he's an idiot, I don't want your damn award. Send me back out on the Lions.
Yeah, Montgomery, tell me about war. Tell me about accomplishment, you tit.
That's where I really fell in love with this guy.
Oh, yeah, dude, that's so fucking Mac.
So in February of 1945, after helping a chaplain remove bodies from a destroyed Tiger tank, the carrier that Leo, the chaplain, and the driver were in hit a landmine, sending Leo into the air before crashing down on his back. When he came to, he found he was being examined by a pair of medical officers who were trying to assess the severity of his wounds. He would be loaded into a transport and taken to a medical facility. The one article said they had to stop like every 15 minutes to pump more morphine into him because he is in so much pain. Once he got to the actual like hospital or whatever, the outpost, doctors determined that he had broken his back in 3 places, broken 4 ribs, and broken both ankles. So, of course, his tour of duty was officially over. Except, of course, Pirate Sniper Terminator Rambo Leo Major was like, fuck that.
Can I use the shattered bones as ammo?
Apparently, after just a week of recovery, you know, they're getting ready to like send him home, but he's got to recover first. So after about a week, he managed to hitch a ride on a passing Jeep, which took him to the Dutch town of Nijmegen. Leo had met a family there during a previous operation, and they let him stay with them for about a month. And then Leo returned to his regiment.
That's so fucking cool.
Yeah. Well, Wikipedia specifically notes, like, Leo would have technically been considered absent without authority, AWOL, basically.
Yeah.
And it
but
says
what are you
it's
going to
not...
do, arrest him?
Well, that's exactly what I said. The article says it's not clear, like, there's no records of how he wasn't punished, but I imagine if he captured 100 Germans with just, like, one eye, he said, yeah, just fucking try to arrest me, you incompetents. And they were like, yeah, just go at it.
Yeah, that's... Good luck.
So, in April, his regiment was approaching the town of Zwolle, which was being held by Germans. Ahead of the assault, command asked for 2 volunteers to scout the city. So, of course, Leo jumped at the chance on his, you know, freshly healed ankles. And so did his friend, Corporal Willie Arsenal, I think is how the last name's pronounced. I just call him Corporal Willie.
Oh, of course he has a fucking friend named Arsenal. What? This guy would kill the Punisher in, like, no time.
Right. So they set out to do their scouting reconnaissance. However, upon sighting the city, the two decided it would be better if they could leave the city intact, where, you know, a full-on assault would certainly not do that. So the best way to take the city intact was to just capture the whole thing by themselves.
That's a good plan.
But yeah.
You know, if we could achieve total victory, that might be the way to go here.
Yeah, most of us would be like at war, be like, there's 2 of them and one of me, fuck this, I give up. And he's like, a city? Yeah, we can do it. There's 2 of us. So they were, you know, formulating a plan on how to take the city. But around midnight, Corporal Willie was spotted. He let his position get compromised, and the German forces shot and killed him. So if making Leo crawl around in the cold pissed him off enough to capture 100 soldiers, you can imagine what his response was to having his friend shot and killed right in front of him. Leo jumped into action and was able to kill 2 of the enemy soldiers from the patrol that had found him, before the rest retreated to their vehicle and fled. But that wasn't good enough for Leo, so he made his way into the city. He came across a German staff car and ambushed the driver, who led him to a local bar where a German officer was drinking. Leo disarmed the guy and found out that the German officer also spoke French. Again, Leo was French-Canadian, so they could actually communicate. Leo told the officer that at 9 a.m. the following morning, the Canadian Army would begin shelling the city with artillery, which would inflict massive casualties on both the German troops and the city's civilians. The officer seemed to understand how bad the situation was that they were in, and so as a sign of good faith, Leo gave the officer his freaking gun back and let the man go. His plan hinged on the officer spreading the word and thus, forcing the Germans into a hasty retreat. But he wasn't going to just, sit back and say, I hope this works. So to further this plan, Leo then immediately took to the streets and began wildly firing his machine gun and just lobbing grenades everywhere, making so much noise that it convinced the Germans that the offensive had already begun. So just
a madman. Like,
yeah,
the one
like just
time...
walking through you have no backup. You're just walking through these streets. I say wildly firing his guy. He obviously cared about not killing civilians. He wasn't just like,
it was just about making
houses.
Noise.
Right. But just to, yeah, I don't know how that even thought process crosses your mind, because most of us are like, okay, maybe I'll find a good position where I can start picking off troops. And he's just like, fuck it, come at me. So throughout the night, he would encounter groups of up to 10 soldiers attempting to flee, which he would capture and lead out of the city and into the custody of nearby troops. Then he'd return and repeat the process. He captured a total of 4 such groups before he came across the Gestapo headquarters, which he set on fire.
Nice.
Then he came across the SS headquarters. There he engaged in a brief firefight with 8 officers inside. He killed 4 of them, and the remaining 4 got the fuck out of there. They're like, we want no part of this guy. And there was actually an interesting footnote. Of the 4 that he killed, it turned out 2 of them they found were disguised as local resistance forces. So it showed that the SS had either infiltrated or was infiltrating the local resistance group. So it turned out to be a really, really good thing that he killed the fuck out of them.
Yeah.
So by 4:30 that morning, German forces had completely evacuated the city of Zwolle, and it had been liberated thanks to the assault of just 1 Canadian pirate sniper. So, again, this sounds like there's like no fucking way 1 soldier took an entire city back. But for this, he was again awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, which, like I said, the details you can probably argue. It's a war story.
Yeah.
But he did take the damn city back basically by himself. He had a friend at the beginning, but yeah.
But that friend's life only served to make the whole story more cooler.
Right. But this medal he did accept, so it must have been awarded by like a smarter general or something. But so that ends the amazing.
I was gonna say, like, all these awards ended with him telling Montgomery to shove it up his ass. That would be just fucking perfect.
Look, fuckers, I'm fighting the Germans now, but when this is done, I'm coming after you guys.
Can you literally not get anyone else to give me this medal? I'm not taking it.
So his capture of the city of Zwolle was really the last amazing World War II story from Leo Major. He did survive the war. He went back to Canada, where he took to civilian work as a pipe fitter. And then in 1952, the Korean War broke out, and he re-enlisted.
He was like, yes. Well, that's my reaction. I'm like, yeah, dude.
Yeah. I've only got one more story of him, and it's from, of course, the Korean War. But his most well-known feat during this particular war was at one point he was asked to lead a group of 20 other scout/snipers to retake Hill 355. I think I didn't put it in my notes, but I think it was nicknamed like Gibraltar Hill or Gibraltar Point or something. So it's an Overwatch
Now we
map.
just call it Leo's.
But it was a position that was held by the American forces, but then they had gotten overrun by the Chinese army and had failed to take it back. So Leo led his troops through the Chinese encampment and managed to make it to the center of the hill itself, where they then opened fire on enemy troops who were so fucking confused by the fact that the shots were coming somehow from the center of their formation that they were forced to scramble and flee. So when you're holding a hill, you're expecting the assault to come from the outside, and all of a sudden there's just shots coming where you assume it's like me playing any online video game where you think your back is safe, right. And that's yeah.
And they were just how often do we play games and we're like, wait, why are we getting shot? Where?
Right. And that's exactly what they did. However, the Chinese troops fled, but they soon counterattacked with 2 divisions. So according to one of the sources, the other ones didn't mention numbers, but the one source said that, he had about 20 snipers on this hill, and he was surrounded by as many as 20,000 Chinese soldiers. So you're only outnumbered 1,000 to 1. But fuck, they got a pirate sniper. Leo's command ordered him to retreat, but because you can't tell a Canadian pirate sniper what to do, he basically just said, fuck that, you incompetence, and insisted on holding the hill. So Canadian forces did their best to train artillery around their position, and Leo kept ordering for them to fire closer to where they were entrenched. They didn't have a whole lot of cover on this hill, but you needed to keep the Chinese army from coming up on you, so he kept ordering the artillery closer. Captain Forbes, who commanded the mortar platoon, would later report that Leo had them firing so close to his own position that often, like as he was communicating back and forth on the radio, Forbes could hear these mortar shells landing and exploding, like just over the radio transmission. The explosions don't really surprise me because they're fucking explosions, but like to hear your own shells thudding over your comrades' radio transmissions, you're like, what the fuck? But his men held the hill for 3 days until reinforcements arrived and were able to drive back the Chinese forces. And Leo was once again awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. So basically, like I say, it's like the second highest honor you can get. He got it 3 times, but the first time, of course, he was like, fuck you, I don't want it from this idiot.
Awesome.
So I know this is...
It's great because it's like, fuck your medal. I got the story. I did the shit.
Right. It's like... And he has a point. It's like, I'm the one out here that, obviously I know what I'm doing. You're just some jackass sitting at a desk. This doesn't mean shit to me.
Yeah. Oh, man.
But I know it's unusual for the people I profile on the podcast and the kind of stories I tend to tell, but Leo actually survived his tour in Korea as well. So he returned to civilian life, and there was nothing super notable. He did often visit the town of Seoul, the one that he had single-handedly liberated. And the people there, like the government and the...
And they had to let him just fire machine guns and throw grenades, just for old time's sake.
I hope they have some kind of, like, festivity every year to do that.
Yeah, lob firecrackers down the road or some shit.
But the people there loved him. Even years after World War II was over, anytime he'd visit, he'd be honored. They named a street after him. They understood, they respected what he had done, too.
I fucking respect it. I love this dude.
Yeah. Well, sadly, Leo did die in 2008, which would have made him 89 years old. So,
or at least that's what the government wants you to think.
Well, by this point, there's hundreds of Leo clones out there that, I mean, how do you think Canada stays in power, eh?
Yeah.
But 89 years old is pretty good life to live for a one-eyed, one-man army who served throughout like 2 of the worst possible conflicts of the last century. I mean, Vietnam's, of course, terrible too. There are a lot of no war is good war, but to have fought and survived both World War II and the Korean War, especially with the mindset of his, which is just like, fuck it, bring it on. Like, he's one of my favorite. I've read a lot of war stories, and this has got to be one of my favorite that I've come across.
Yeah, I needed this.
I like
my story. Like,
I like to think that he was reincarnated as a 1500s pirate. Like, if you're gonna have reincarnation, it doesn't have to adhere to like, you can go back in time. Like that's But yeah, cool guy. I hope he has like a whole town named after him in Canada somewhere.
I'll get him one. Any proceeds from our Patreon go now directly to getting this guy the fucking city and memorial he deserves.
We're tasteless. We're the non-essential podcast. Our money is going to go to digging him up and giving him a new eye, and then we'll rebury him.
And then doing a live show with the body. That's fucked up, right, Leo? Yes, it is.
He'd probably fucking kill us. Like,
yeah, that's what. People will be like, the show sucked, but the finale was great. When the skeleton pulled out a gun and they were both surprised, like, you really thought they weren't in on it.
We've talked a lot about it before, but, World War II history is a thing that a lot of people over here, just throughout the world, but it's a very studied, topic, and a lot of people are really into war history. I used to be. I'm not so much anymore. But I think you don't often think of Canadian soldiers when you think of these like badass commandos, but of course they had them too. Every like army that participated has their stories.
There's always somebody who's a little more gung-ho than everyone else, no matter what your military is. There's always some fucking super soldier.
But that's what I mean. Like, if you go back to the beginning, remember when he enlisted, he specifically said he was enlisting to prove to his father that he was someone to be proud. I hope when he got back to Canada, his father was like, I am so proud. And he's like, who the fuck are you? I don't even care anymore.
Yeah, you fucking punked your father.
Yeah,
man.
I'm way out of your league now, dick.
I hope you're a dad I can be proud of, because honestly, you're leaving me wanting here.
I mean, if he's not going to accept an award from a general above him, he's probably not going to accept kudos from his dad that he hated anyway.
Oh man, he's so fucking cool. I want a wallpaper on my computer of that guy.
I mean,
something to like. War is a terrible thing. But if
it's really easy to tell these stories
happen,
in a way that like glamorizes it, because we're picturing like Hollywood, and it was certainly not glamorous because you are murdering people and getting shot at and stuff. But
I'm just saying, if we're going to agree as a species to like continuously commit these atrocities against each other, he did it right. Like he did it in the most fucking badass action movie way possible. And
it makes you wonder, like, if one guy, because I think that's part of the problem when you're, or not maybe part of the problem, but part of the reason that things resulted like they did is because when you're in war, there's almost these, I don't want to say like unwritten rules because that's stupid, but there's expected ways for other people to behave. So like when he takes the town, for instance, the Germans hold this town. You don't view one enemy soldier as a threat. And then all of a sudden there's this dude just fucking firing a machine gun at you and lobbing grenades everywhere, and you don't know what to do.
Yeah. And just like, he had that fucking goddamn Dirty Harry thing going on where it's like, look, I'm in the shit. I don't need a medal from some fucking piece of shit behind a desk who doesn't know what the fuck I'm doing. Like, there's that real like romanticized aspect of like, anybody who wants to tell a boss to fuck off. Like this guy did it in the most serious
the other
situation.
Two because he accepted the other two because he realized that they're a pointy. He's like, I could probably stab some dude in the neck with this.
This is basically a ninja star.
Yeah.
Which those should be our badges. They should double as throwing knives.
Sure. Yeah. But
yeah. All right, Leo. You cheered me up today, man.
Yeah. So that's all I got. He fought, and like I said, it's rare that you read about somebody like this. You're just waiting for like the whole time I'm reading about, now he's in Korea and he takes this hill. You're a badass, and they're like, unsurmountable odds. He keeps telling artillery to fire closer. You're like, fuck, this is how he's going to go out. And it's like, no, he fucking won again.
Yeah. I mean, if you have to World War II, why not Leo's?
How great would it have been to be in his regiment? You didn't have to do anything. It's like, we're going to have to take this town tomorrow. Never mind, guys. Hey, Leo got it.
Hey, Leo, you want to take care of this battle we were going to have?
Just imagine how different it could have been if Canada had just been like, hey, Leo, you want to march into Germany and take out this Hitler guy?
Well, you also, like, again, like, war is terrible, and, like, a lot of it is avoidable, too. But you also have to put it, like, obviously he's a fucking cool action hero from these stories, but also how many lives he saved by being that cool action hero.
Oh, sure, yeah.
That's a lot of deaths that got left on the table because he was able to...
He wasn't lying when he talked to this German officer saying, hey, if we launch an assault on the city, lots of people, including civilians, are going to die. And it's easy, too, because it happened a lot, to just assume, oh, the Germans were the bad guys because that's what we're taught, and they didn't fucking care about civilians. They did. Ultimately, military strategy came first, but they weren't necessarily out there to just slaughter, towns of people.
Yeah.
So, I guess sometimes yes, but yeah. But and I do think it was more fuck, they don't care about killing civilians, so they're going to bomb us. But yeah, like you said, that was literally the plan was, hey, you scout ahead and find out where they are, and then we're going to roll tanks in here and go. And so that is a very good point. Yeah. I'd like to know, though, how many people were asleep and then they just see one soldier like walking through the streets, lobbing grenades. Just, you're like, what the fuck is this guy doing?
You're just looking at, okay, this war is just making everyone insane.
Look, the Germans are running. Woohoo!
Yep.
I like to picture as the last German soldier was like escaping town, some of the citizens came out and like kicked him in the butt like they do in the movie. I want
to think like the last German soldier was probably somebody who no one would listen to, but he turned around and like, wait, that's just one dude.
Guys, there's only one of them. They're like, there's no... Yeah.
Shut up. It's a fucking full-on assault. Get out of there.
Or they all thought that, and then they saw it was the one-eyed guy from Canada, and they're like, fuck. Like,
wait, oh shit, it's Leo. Might make me more nervous than like bombs, honestly.
Anyway.
But yeah, that was good shit.
Yep.
Consistently good shit on this show. 41
every week.
41, which is really 82 topics of good shit.
That's the mind-bending thing. We were joking earlier about, like, man, and then having to come up with topics. But keep in mind, 41 shows is, 82 topics that you're trying not to repeat.
Oh, man.
And I'm pretty convinced that there was only 100 interesting things that have ever happened throughout history. So we're getting there.
Yeah. Episode 50, the end. All right. Well, we'll be back at it next week when the wheels really fall off.
Probably.
Yeah. It's like the saying, like anybody's podcast is somebody's like first podcast as far as a listener. For us doing it, any podcast will be our last podcast.
That's part of the suspense and surprise.
Yeah. I'm just expecting it, honestly, like a one show that will just end for some reason at 32 minutes where we're both like, fuck it.
Yeah, it's not that we don't have a topic that week. It's just we're halfway through it.
You'll be about 4 minutes into yours, and we'll just be like, you know what? You want to play Apex or something? All right, we'll see you next week.
Later.